you are going to lose the stewardship. Ellen White wrote this in Christ's Object Lessons, page 369. To the unfaithful steward, his Lord's goods had been entrusted for benevolent purposes, but he had used them for himself. That's why I asked him to sing this song. Because no one in this world lives for himself except man. For the present, for the temporal. And so what she's saying, he had used his master's, the rich man's goods, for himself, rather than for benevolent purposes to help others. So now he's in a difficult situation. Notice verse 3. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I am ashamed to beg. As the saying goes, he was between a rock and a hard place. Once again, Ellen White in Christ's Object Lessons, page 367 wrote, with the prospect of discharge before him, the steward saw three paths open to his choice. He must labor, beg, or starve. Not very good options, right? None of the three options were very good. So now he says, I've been living for the present. I've only been living for myself. And when I have to render an account, the master's going to take away my stewardship, and I'm going to be a street person. So I better start thinking about others now. And so in Luke chapter 16, verse 4, he lays out a plan. I am resolved what to do. That when I am put out of the stewardship, they, that is his friends, right? In the parable, his friends, the ones that he gave the discounts to, they may receive me into their houses. So what Jesus is saying is that this individual, this unjust steward, by giving a discount to his master's clients, they would be obligated to receive him into their houses because he gave them a discount. Are you with me? Yes. Now let's read verses 5 through 7. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. In other words, I'm going to give you a 50% discount. Because now he's thinking about the future. He's saying, I'm going to be a street person. I'm not going to have any place to live. I'm not going to be a steward anymore. I better, instead of thinking about the present and using everything for myself, I better start thinking about the future. And so it says in verse 7, then he said to another, and how much do you owe? So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. Once again, Christ's Object Lessons, page 367. You notice we read from Scripture, then we read the amplification by the Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White comments, this unfaithful servant made others sharers with him in his dishonesty. He defrauded his master to advantage them. And by accepting this advantage, they placed themselves under obligation to receive him as a friend into their homes. But the main point is that he's now thinking about the future. He's not thinking only about the present. Now, what does the master think about the procedure that was developed by this unjust steward? The master was impressed. Not by his dishonesty, but by his shrewdness in no longer thinking about the present, but thinking about the future.
Gino.
In Luke 16, verse 8, it says, so the master You know, if you read the King James Version, you might be confused because it's translated, so the Lord. You might get the impression that Jesus is commending the unjust steward. No, it's the Lord of this unjust steward. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. Not because, the point is not the method. The point is he's thinking about the future. The point is his shrewdness. See, he was dumb and he became smart. Because he said, I can't live for the here and now. Because if I lose my sustenance, I'm going to be out of the stewardship. I'm going to be in trouble. Let me read you a couple of statements. Once again from Christ Object Lessons 367. Christ did not commend the unjust steward, but he made use of a well-known occurrence to illustrate the lesson he desired to teach. In other words, Jesus did not invent this story. This story was well known. In fact, I'm going to show you a little bit later that there was a case of a publican that had gone through this very experience. So when the hearers heard this parable, they said, oh, that makes me think of something that I just saw. Ellen White also wrote, the worldly man praised the sharpness of the man who had defrauded him. However, the rich man's commendation was not the commendation of God. So now we have to read the second part of verse 8. Let's read the entire verse again. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. And now Jesus is going to speak. In other words, he's going to give the lesson that he wants to teach from this parable. He stated, for the sons of this world, who would the sons of this world be represented by? The unjust steward, right? For the sons of this world are more shrewd. Notice the emphasis is not dishonesty. It's not in the method that he used. It's in now he's thinking of the future and not of the present. He's thinking about benefiting others and not benefiting himself. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. Now Jesus is going to compare this unjust steward with those who claim to follow him. Those are the sons of light, you and me. Now let's read verse 9. I say to you, speaking about the sons of light, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon. This is Jesus speaking. And he's saying to those who are listening, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon. Then when you fail, in other words, we're supposed to do the same thing that the unjust steward did. Not in the dishonesty, but in thinking about the future instead of the present. So Jesus says, make friends for yourselves of unrighteous mammon. Don't get hung up on that. We'll come back to that in a moment. Then when you fail, other versions say when the mammon fails, they may receive you into an everlasting home. Of course, the big question is, who is they that will receive the sons of light into the everlasting home? That's the big question. We'll come back to that. Are you with me so far? Yes. Now, let's go and notice what is meant by unrighteous mammon. The problem is that we think of unrighteous mammon as something bad. And Jesus is saying, you know, make friends with unrighteous mammon. How could Jesus be saying that we should make friends with unrighteous mammon? Unrighteous mammon sounds pretty bad. But if you read several Bible versions, you'll notice that unrighteous mammon simply means the resources that we have in this world. Let me just read you several versions. The New Century Version reads in the following way, verses 8 through 10. So the master praised the dishonest manager for being smart. I like that translation. Yes, worldly people are smarter with their own kind than spiritual people are. I tell you, make friends for yourselves using worldly riches. That's unrighteous man. Worldly riches. So that when those riches are gone, in other words, when you no longer have the riches of this world, you will be welcomed in those homes that continue forever. Does that help? Notice the New International Version.